What's up with St. Louis? We'll find out next on City Corner. I'm Steve Potter, and welcome to City Corner. Well, if you're from St. Louis, grew up here, or maybe just are friends with people who live here, a new book I think you'll find interesting. What's with St. Louis? The quirks, personality, and charm of the Gateway City. Please meet our guest today, Valerie Kienzle, who wrote the book, and we welcome you.
Thank you.
And I want to point out that you've lived here a long time, but technically you're not a St. Louis native.
No, I'm not.
But 30-something years?
Yes. So this is my adopted hometown now.
Right. Well, welcome.
Thank you.
But, that kind of brings up a point that I think you make in the book, too, and that we have a reputation for. If you weren't born here, you may have lived here 30-something years, Valerie, but...
I'm not a St. Louisan.
Right. Have you ever felt that way?
Occasionally, yeah.
Well, my question is then, and I love your book and all the things it touches on. I've laughed so much and smiled reading through it. But since you weren't from here and you moved here, I'm assuming not knowing much about our traditions, history, and lore, how did that first attract your attention and get you this far to write a book about it?
Well, I was introduced to Josh Stevens, who is the owner-publisher of Reedy Press. He is a native St. Louisan. It was his idea. He said, you come up with a list of things that you've always wondered about or things that have puzzled you about St. Louis. You as a non-native and me as a native, I'll come up with a list. So we combined our list, came up with 75 different things, and 8 months later we have this book.
Wow. Now you're from Nashville, Tennessee originally.
Yes, I am.
So it must have been hard to move to the city that you weren't familiar with, and it certainly is a different atmosphere and vibe than Nashville.
Absolutely.
How long did it take you to sort of feel like, hey, I like this place?
About a year. Mm-hmm.
That's not bad.
No. It's just, I think starting a new chapter, everything was new and different.
Well, I want to just kind of go through your book here, and it's in sections, like you do a whole bunch of chapters about food, and you have different categories, and we'll talk about that later. But one thing you say in your preface, Valerie, I want to ask you about, you talk about how St. Louisans embrace diversity. Could you expand on that a little bit?
I think as a whole, St. Louis is very open to different kinds of ethnic backgrounds and has been since the immigrants first came over to St. Louis in the 1800s. Different skin colors, different religious beliefs, different types of families, what defines a family. I think we're a very open-minded community in that sense. And
I like a lot of the things you chose to talk about. A lot of them are, I'll just call them funny, right? I mean, they're amusing little traditions we have or ideas that kind of set us apart.
Quirky.
Quirky,
Yes.
That's probably a better word. All right, and I wanted to start with my favorite one because I've had more arguments over the years with people about Provel cheese than anyone you know. And I like how you titled your chapter, Who Put White Velveeta on My Pizza? So tell me about Provel cheese. And first of all, it's real cheese, Valerie. It's a combination of cheeses, but they're real cheeses.
The definition I found said it is a food product. It is not a cheese. I'm just telling you what I found from the research. Yes, it's a combination of processed cheddar and provolone and Swiss, which gives it a creamy texture.
And the point of the reason it's in your book is because it started here. I guess, I don't know if you can get it anywhere else.
To the best of my knowledge, you cannot get it other places unless you order it. Emos does sell and ship it.
You can buy it in Schnucks also.
Well, yes, yes. But I have a nephew who lives in Buffalo. He's a restaurateur. And he came down here and tried Emo's pizza, which he compared to cheese on a cracker. But he did like the Provel cheese, and so he has made arrangements to have some shipped to Buffalo.
I actually ordered a frozen Emo's with Provel once and drove it to a friend in Chicago who used to live here and was dying for one, so I went to all that effort so he could have his Emo's with Provel.
Yes.
But people either seem to either really love it or they don't love it.
Correct.
Is that what you found?
Yes, yes.
Let's take another look at the food. One St. Louis tradition that I have to admit I've never tried are those brain sandwiches.
Me either.
What? No, really?
No.
Even in the name of research, you didn't try one?
No, I did not. I talked to a lot of people. I talked to the owner of Schatzi's Deli, our restaurant, and they serve a lot of them. And it's an interesting combination. I think it probably comes from the best I can tell from my research, from the Depression era, when nothing was wasted, everything was used, there was no food wasted. So the owner tells me there's key is to the seasoning and the coating. They cook it and then they serve it on marbled rye with slice of onion and hot mustard and pickles.
But the brain itself, it's like crispy, like fried chicken, sort of?
A bit crispy on the outside and kind of mushy on the inside.
I've asked people to describe it to me, and I've never really understood it.
Well, that's the best I could come up with.
You want to go try it sometime?
No, thank you.
Okay.
You go ahead. Let me know how it goes, okay?
How do you feel about toasted ravioli? That you can't get that? I never heard of toasted ravioli until I lived in St. Louis full time.
Right. And there are two schools of thought, two families that claim to have accidentally discovered toasted ravioli. But apparently it was a mistake. A family was making some ravioli. They accidentally dropped it into a pot of hot oil and fried it and decided to taste it and deemed that it was delicious. And so I talked to Representative Charlie Gito's. They make about 10,000 a week.
Wow.
Yeah.
I think some of those, pizza places are serving them now too. Toasted
Yes.
ravioli, pretty popular. I don't know if you're right about gooey butter cake in your book or not, do you?
Yes.
Because you mentioned ravioli was a mistake. Isn't that the story about gooey butter cake too? It was a mistake?
That's the school of thought, yes. There was no definitive answer on that, but it's sort of a combination of cake, pudding, custard. However it came about, it's delicious. And we have lots of places in St. Louis that really do a fabulous job. Park Avenue Coffee has 7 or 8 different flavors at any one given time you go in there. Total, they have about 79 different flavors that they can draw upon.
That's good stuff though.
Oh, it is, but not good for you.
High calories. Do you have any idea how many calories is in that?
Best I could tell, for a small piece, about 500.
Wow.
Yeah.
A few years ago, I have a claim to fame. Jennifer Holliday, Dreamgirls, the singer, she was in St. Louis doing the final Dreamgirls tour, and she was on a radio show I did, and I just happened, it was quirky, I had a piece of gooey butter cake, and I knew it was a St. Louis tradition, so I brought it to her, and said, this is St. Louis tradition, I'm sure you've never heard about it, and she said no, and I just left it with her, did the interview, and I didn't know if she ever ate it or not. A few weeks later, I met some people from the community who said that she loved it. After she'd eaten it, she had sent people out to get some more, and then got the recipe and took it with her.
Oh, wow.
So it has a reputation.
Converted somebody then.
Yeah, we converted Jennifer Holliday, of all people.
Yeah.
Mostaccioli. I never understood mostaccioli.
I didn't either. When I moved here and
I
went
still
to
don't.
wedding receptions, it's economical to prepare. It's a lot of pasta. It fills people up quickly. A little bit of meat, a little bit of red sauce, a little bit of Parmesan cheese.
I always thought it was kind of like a lasagna version, but not
I think
exactly.
it's economical. Fills people up, and it's good for serving huddled masses of people that show up at wedding receptions.
Wedding
or whatever.
receptions, yeah, I've been to so many parties where, there it is, mostaccioli.
Yes,
People
yes.
from out of town don't understand what that is.
No, they don't.
How long did it take you? You said you and Josh Reedy came up with lists of things unique to St. Louis. How long did it take you to do this kind of research?
About 8 months, yes. And we had many more topics. We just narrowed it down to 75 just to make it a little more manageable. But I looked in all kinds of resource books. I interviewed people, spent time in the reference library section, strained my eyes reading documents online.
The
And
book
this
is
what
What's
we
with
came up
St. Louis, and I think anybody that's familiar with St. Louis is going to kind of relate to all the things we're talking about. So that was a section on food, but your book deals with some of the other things. The weather. One thing people always talk about here is St. Louis summers.
Yes.
The heat and humidity here of all places. How is that different? You know, Nashville is really not that far away, and it's really not much farther south than we are. But what's the difference?
We are close to the rivers. I mean, there's basically nothing but the Ozark Mountains, which, if you look at them, aren't really mountains, to block the Gulf Stream winds that come from the south. And so we get that. We get high pressure systems come down from the South Pacific or the North Pacific area, and they combine, and we have humidity.
But people either from warmer climates seem to suffer more here. It's really unique to this location.
It's very humid here, yes.
Yeah. Earthquakes, too. I remember my grandmother, who was born in 1891, was very young and used to tell me about the earthquake of, I'll get the year wrong, was it 1896?
There was one then, there was one in 1927.
She remembers one in 1896 in Lafayette Square. But you always, we're near the New Madrid Fault, and here we are, this city with tall buildings and old brick structures, which are not very sturdy when it comes to earthquakes. So what's our earthquake situation here?
There are always tremors going on. We may not feel them, but there are always things going on, and it could happen. Another big earthquake could happen. But
Do you have a date for that? Or?
no, not at all.
Also, you talk in your book a lot about St. Louisans loving to rush to their basements when it's weather-related. Mm-hmm. What's that story?
We tend to take our weather seriously here because it can be so severe as far as the thunderstorms, tornadoes, potential for earthquakes. And we duck and cover. We take to the basements.
For safety reasons?
Yes, yes.
The River de Pere is another thing that's, what's up with St. Louis? That's so funny. It has such a fancy name. It sounds, and then there are places in the city you can go and you're not sure if it's a drainage basin or a river.
Right. River de Pere is, it's French for River of the Fathers. And it's been a stream here since the 1700s. It was first mentioned. But first time I encountered it, it was full of weeds. It was an empty trench. I saw frogs and wildflowers. And from what I understand, most of the year that's what it's like. But if it does rain in the spring, you get floods, and then it's very beneficial to have that empty trench.
Yeah, absolutely. One more thing on water before we take our break. And I've always been fascinated, and I really appreciate the couple of old water towers that we have remaining in St. Louis, and they're pretty historically significant and pretty rare on a national scale, aren't they?
Yes, yes. The United States used to have hundreds of water towers. Now there are just 7 left. We have 3 of them, and they are all National Register properties. They helped with the, back in the early days when they had water, there used to be water pressure surges, and the towers helped alleviate the surges in businesses and homes.
Do we just have 2 left then?
3.
3. Mm-hmm. Okay, there's the one in North Grand. There's one down around Tower Grove Park.
Compton.
Compton, right. So that's all 3.
Yes.
Okay, got it. Hey, we're going to take a short break, Valerie. When we come back, we're going to talk more about your book, What's with St. Louis? And we'll do that right after this.
So, same time next week?
Well, of course. Put away a few bucks, feel like $1 million. For free tips to help you save, go to Feed the Pig.
The odds of this daughter of a clergyman spending 11 weeks at #1 on the U.S. singles charts? 1 in 19 million. The odds of going on to win 6 Grammy Awards? 1 in 1.4 million. The odds of having a child diagnosed with autism? 1 in 110. I'm Toni Braxton, and I encourage you to learn the signs of autism at autismspeaks.org.
I'm Steve Potter. Welcome back to City Corner. And Valerie Kienzle is our guest, and she's written the book, What's with St. Louis? the quirks, personality, and charm of the gateway city. And so what you did, Valerie, you're a transplant here, although you've lived here over 30 years. But you started examining all sort of the history, the lore, kind of quirky things about St. Louis you thought were interesting. You tried to get to the bottom of where it came from?
Yes.
Is that a good way to put it?
Yes.
Is there anything that really, that surprised you the most? Does anything stand out? Anything you learned about St. Louis that you thought was good, bad, funny, sad, anything?
Probably the cemeteries, and I've talked about this on other interviews. There's Calvary Cemetery and there's Bell Fountain Cemetery. They were part of the rural cemetery movement in the mid-1800s, and it was a Parisian trend to bury people very far from the city limits. So at the time, when they were started in late 1840s, early 1850s, it was very far away from the city. And to me, it's like you could be rich, you could be poor, but anybody could be buried there. And everybody's an equal. When you're dead, and your class status no longer matters.
Oh, but some of those cemeteries, you can tell class a little bit. There's some very elaborate monuments and things, right?
Yes, yes. At Bell Fountain, there's Adolphus Busch, very elaborate. And then at Calvary, there's Dred Scott, very simple.
But they're beautiful places, sort of
Yes.
like parks, I think. You talk about soft drinks, and I kind of had this back in my mind that I sort of knew this, that at one time St. Louis was a location where a lot of soft drinks were made.
Yes, it was. And I think, from what I could tell, that had something to do with the unfortunate occurrence called Prohibition from 1920 to 1933. This had been a really big brewing city, lots of breweries here. Prohibition took care of that, and so therefore there were a lot of people out of work, out of jobs, people who made pallets, who made bottles. They were out of jobs too, and necessity breeds invention. So there were drinks like Howdy Orange, Smile, 7-Up, IBC Root Beer. Those were all products that started at Fitz's and a Whistle. Those were all products that started in the 1920s, and once they were developed and introduced, then these people who made bottles and pallets were at work again.
Right.
Also, you had to have something to mix with your bathtub gin, your moonshine, because from what I understood in the research, most everybody had their sources anyway.
Really?
So you needed a mixer.
Because I'm not sure I've ever tasted moonshine, but maybe sometimes it didn't taste that good on its own.
No. And I have tasted it,
Oh,
yes,
yeah.
yes.
So you need that soda to do
A little
that.
bit of something to cut it, yeah.
Let's see. What about? Here's one. If you're not from here, no one ever understands what Hoosiers means. I remember. I never went to school here. Grandparents on both sides are here, so I was always here for summers and Christmases. But that I wasn't really connected with St. Louis and traditions and stuff until I moved back in the late 1980s, where I lived here full time. And I remember being with some friends that I was working with a couple times, and they talk about Hoosiers, and I kept thinking, why are they always talking about these people from Indiana? And it took me like a couple months to figure out what Hoosiers meant here. Where does that story come from?
Same thing. I wondered that too. I kept hearing people say, "Oh, he's such a Hoosier," or "That's such a Hoosier thing."
Right.
And I wondered what it was. Then I was working with a girl, and she talked about her mother leaving the Christmas tree up year-round in their living room. And
Year-round?
Year-round. Lights, decorations, everything. When it wasn't the holidays, she threw a sheet on it. And then when it was back to the holiday time, she pulled the sheet off, and there was the tree ready to go. And I realized that's a Hoosier. Or being down in a neighborhood when there's 6 inches of snow on the ground and there's pots out front, but they're full of plastic, colorful flowers, even with the 6 inches of snow sitting on top of them.
So it kind of means unsophisticated, kind of like a country hick sort of.
Yeah, in other parts of the country, you would call somebody a hick or a redneck or something like that.
Do we know why we use the term Hoosiers here?
No, we do not. And I have talked to a couple of people who were from Indiana, and they're a bit offended by that terminology because they think, the way we use it is in a derogatory manner, that's not such a good thing.
Right.
And they don't understand it either.
I kind of don't blame them. What about that expression, "Hey, you guys"?
Okay, that's our language vernacular. And the best I could understand, I talked to a professor at Washington University. We had so many different ethnic populations that moved here. And many of them, they tried to speak phrases or words that they heard other people of other nationalities talk, and they butchered it. And then those butchered words became part of the vernacular. So when you hear warshed or farty far.
My mother used to say, "How I farty."
Yes. Okay. When you hear those things, that's what it is. It's sort of a butchering of the vernacular, the local vernacular.
Tell me a little bit about yourself, Valerie. This is your first book, What's with St. Louis for Reedy Press. I knew you did a couple for Arcadia.
Yes.
One on St. Charles and one on Columbia, Missouri.
Yes, I did.
What's your background in journalism?
I attended and graduated from the University of Missouri. I worked briefly for a daily newspaper in Nashville. I was in public relations for the 7-Up company. I also worked for an ad agency, and I've done a lot of freelance work.
Mm-hmm. You have anything? Do you have any plans for another book?
Yes, I'm working on actually 2 books right now.
What can you share with us about that?
One is on the lost architectural treasures of St. Louis. There was a time when we were in Ray's craze, 40s, 50s, 60s, when some of the beautiful architectural buildings and structures were torn down in the name of progress to build parking lots or fast food restaurants, whatever. So that's one of them, and another one I'm working on is dealing with the fashion industry, the clothing and shoe industry in St. Louis.
There was an area downtown St. Louis that was huge in fashion at one time.
Yes, Washington Avenue, there was about a 15-block area, and they were one of the top locations in the country.
And haven't I read, there is some movement downtown now to sort of bring that back. People are working on that, fashion in particular.
Yes.
Do you know anything about that? Or?
Yes, there is like an incubator that's trying to bring St. Louis back as a fashion hub.
Right. Well, we'll come back when you have those books ready.
Okay.
This one's What's with St. Louis, though. You talk about St. Louis being the 4th city. What do you mean?
Okay, at one time, we were the 3rd largest city in the United States.
New York, Chicago, and us.
Well, Philadelphia.
Really?
Yeah, and Chicago, we were closely aligned to Chicago. And for a while, we were ahead, and then they got the first railroad, Transcontinental Railroad, there a few years before St. Louis did. And the population, the officials in St. Louis were afraid the population was going to be higher in Chicago, and it was. So they fudged a little bit, and they actually lied when the census time came around. Okay, but St. Louis did become, again, the 3rd largest in 1904,
Union
1900.
Station was the deal.
Union Station, and then having the World's Fair when the world came to St. Louis.
Right. Another thing that you talk about that's kind of quirky to St. Louis is, I guess, has to do with city and county government. You have the city of St. Louis, and you have how many small municipalities in the county, and people that are from here may not realize that that's not the way it is everywhere.
Right, right. 1876, when the city and the county decided to form separate entities. And at that time, the city thought they had given themselves plenty of room to grow, and perhaps looking at it nowadays a little short-sighted, and there have been some talk about reuniting the two. But yes, there are many municipalities, 90-plus municipalities. So you can get on one of the longer roads like Lindbergh or Olive, and you can go through various different municipalities.
I wonder if anything will ever come of that. People talked about, you know, and that also kind of messes up things like crime statistics. Sometimes I think people misinterpret those because if you look at St. Louis's crime statistics compared to, say, Louisville, Kentucky, where the whole county is the city, that changes things. You know, when you figure in over the whole area,
Yeah,
it changes
it's like
the way it looks.
Make comparisons
Right.
accurately.
Yeah.
Yes.
So that's an ongoing thing.
Yes.
How come all these streets in downtown St. Louis are named after trees? And I'm not complaining.
That was a popular thing in
A poplar thing?
popular in Philadelphia. It was started in Philadelphia, where you named them for trees, or you named them for number. You had numbers or letters, and poplar, tulip. It just went through like an arboretum, and then as people made names for themselves, some of the street names were changed, like Gratiot or Choteau, Laclede.
Right, our own pronunciations for the French. Yeah. You also talk about like how not only street names can change from one block to another. I'm exaggerating a little bit, but also like if you drive through a highway, sometimes we were talking about municipalities. You might go. There's that one place on 170 where you can go through like 5 different
Yes.
communities in like 2 miles or something.
Yes, yes, very small. Some of them have services, and that leads to confusion, I think, too, for people that are driving or maybe get a ticket in this municipality or, you know.
You talk about St. Louis treasures, and I think you hit the nail on the head in a couple of these. A few you mentioned, I totally agree. They're just like jewels. Like the Soulard Farmers Market, City Museum, the zoo, and there are more.
Yes, the Art Museum, which was the one building that's left from the 1904 World's Fair, the Science Center, the Botanical Garden. We have so many treasures that are open, and most of them are free and available to anybody.
And we just got 1 minute left, but I have to close out with this because I'd be neglect if I didn't. Where'd you go to high school? I'm not asking you that, but why is that a St. Louis thing?
I found no definitive answer on that. I talked to a lot of people. Older people tell me it had to do with big rivalries that used to exist between some of the big city high schools and sports teams. And you didn't want to be friends or date anybody that went to a rival high school.
You couldn't even date?
No. That's what I was told. Other people say it's a way of classifying or describing cultural differences or socioeconomical differences. If you found out that somebody went to a particular religious affiliated high school, you could pass judgments based on what school that was, what part of town it was in.
I didn't realize there were so many rules. Well, my dad went to Normandy and my mom went to Clayton High School, so I guess they were probably like a scandalous couple.
I suppose so.
Where can you get your book, Valerie?
It's a book. It's available at all the independent bookstores, Subterranean Books in U City, Barnes & Noble, the Book House, the Novel Neighbor.
And we're wrapping up, so we've only really touched the tip of the iceberg here. I hope people will pick up the book. It's really entertaining, and you'll find answers to things you may have never even thought about but heard of, if that makes any sense at all. Valerie, thank you so much for being here today.
Thank you for having me.
What's with St. Louis? I'm Steve Potter. We'll see you next time. Bye.